You are about to journey against the current of contemporary thought and beyond the troubled waters of daily news to the very source of our extraordinary culture. You are going upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Mr. Roy Edge, good to see you, sir.
Jack Cashill, how are you?
This must be Upstream with Cashill and Edge.
Why do you call it that?
Well, now that you ask, I don't think we've explained this more than 10 times.
Might have a new viewer.
Or a new viewer of import. You know, that's the thing. We're looking for the mega viewer. No, because Andrew Breitbart famously said, well, culture is downstream from politics, and we leave the politics to the everyday kind of person anyone can do politics, but to go upstream to the culture is where it's at. And today we're going to tackle the collapse of basically of American journalism. Maybe it's universal journalism. Maybe it's journalism everywhere. But I have this great story that just is so indicative of what happened.
What is that?
It's a show and tell, right?
Okay.
It's a literal show and tell. We live in metropolitan Kansas City, you and I. Me in Kansas City, you in the suburbs.
I'm on the Kansas side.
I on the Missouri side. Right. I on the slave state side.
That's right.
And so one day I was out walking in my slave state, this is some years ago. And it's like a day like today, cold February day, overcast. There's no one out walking. I just wanted to get my exercise. And I pass one of my near neighbors who's walking his dog. So we stopped to talk because, hey, there were only two people out. And he's the editor of the Kansas City Star. He later becomes the publisher, Art Brisbane.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know Art?
Yes.
His grandfather, by the way, Arthur Brisbane.
Interesting story there.
Yeah, was a great, powerful, dominant journalist in the Hearst chain. Mm-hmm. Very famous. But Art isn't that famous, but he's, he was a pretty decent guy. We always got along pretty well. And at the time, I should say, I was executive editor of the city's business magazine. So in other words, although that's not on the level of the Kansas City Star in terms of media, I'm not an insignificant person in my neighborhood.
Oh, no.
No, I'm very significant.
Very
You're supposed to say
highly.
that. Highly significant.
Oh.
Anyhow, I'm out walking, and I'm wearing this hat, and Art sees me, and he says, oh, what's with the hat? And my hat says, U.S. Park Police. And he said, why the U.S. Park Police? What's that about? And I said, oh, it's my Vince Foster memorial hat, right?
And he probably said, who's Vince Foster?
Well, not quite that bad.
Okay.
Today he would have said that. Today the editor of the Star would have said, or as we're going to get the story we're going to get into, is like, who's Seth Rich? Who knows? Well, Vince Foster was the Seth Rich of his day in a way.
Right.
Well, so I explained. He knew who he was, and he said, you're not one of those people.
Oh yeah, I hear that.
Who thinks that Vince Foster was murdered? Are you? I said, well, let me tell you, Art. I said, I've looked into this very deeply. I said, I've been to Fort Marcy Park, where his body was found, twice, right? I've talked to the principals involved. I've talked to the eyewitnesses, and their attorneys. And what I would tell you is this. He did not die where they found his body, right?
That's right.
Here's what Brisbane does. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And he walks away. Literally ends the conversation and walks away. Now, you're the editor/publisher of a major newspaper. I'm delivering to you inside dope on one of the great unsolved mysteries of our time, and you don't want to hear it. And that was a harbinger of things to come.
That had to even kind of make you shake your head a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, what it did is it provided me with a great stand-up moment for years to come. I could start a speech with, you want to know what the state of the media is? Let me tell you. Let me show you. I'll give you a show and tell, so I'm not just talking. No, he didn't want to know.
Nope.
Now, have you ever been to Fort Marcy Park?
No.
I just had to tell you about the last time I was there.
I have never even heard of it.
Come on.
No. I've never
you're a little slow on the uptick on the. This is 1993 when Vince Foster died, by the way. So the notion that conspiracy theories are something endemic to this age of social media is false. They've been around for a long time.
Oh, you had to be paying a little attention before, but it was
Right.
always there. I mean,
And they spring up in the absence of real news. So the major media did not want to know what happened to Vince Foster. He was Hillary Clinton's, he's the White House counsel and the reputed lover of Hillary Clinton. This is the first year of the Clinton presidency. And in July of that year, he leaves work one day. He says goodbye to his secretary, who just happens to be Linda Tripp, of all people,
wow.
who would become famous for the Monica Lewinsky affair. And then it goes off, and then his body is later found supine in Fort Marcy Park. Now, does supine mean lying on your back or lying on your stomach?
I think you're back.
I think so. 'Cause I was just taking a stab at that. I'm never sure. Prone being the opposite, I guess. But on a berm, like a little berm, right? And so it's the famous berm where Vince Foster's body was found. And I was there one day in the winter with John Clark, who is the attorney, historically a Democrat, attorney for the chief eyewitness, a guy named Patrick Knowlton. You can look this up on YouTube. This Knowlton's testimony is still available. And we were just going over the scene, and it had snowed and then iced over the snow the night before. So we get to the top of the berm, and we both fall on our butts and slide down the Vince Foster Memorial berm, So
Man, that can smart.
but it seemed so blasphemous. We were laughing hysterically at the sight of poor Vince Foster's demise. So sorry about that, Vince. It's a shame, but the story was handled by the U.S. Park Police, which is why I was wearing that hat. My friend who got the hat for me was literally involved in some hands-on Washington shenanigans. So it was a natural fit. But that's where we are. They don't want to know.
Mm-mm.
And it's and when they hear information that is contrary to their expectations, they're shocked and dismayed.
Well, and at this point, this has been going on
For some time.
For some time. I made a few notes when I found out what you were going to talk about. But I think the media, I think what's different recently, and I'm talking about the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
The cases have been so overt, so way outside even the normal crazy train tracks that they've jumped the shark, and it's bleeding over. And the awareness of this is now bleeding over into Joe Sixpack territory, where the normal person who just swallows headlines and sound bites, never does any reading, never would ever watch a long-form deep dive interview with somebody who actually was an expert and looking them in the eyes while they're getting hard questions.
Right.
They'd never do that. They're starting to pick up I call it the Baby Huey moment.
Explain.
You remember the cartoons Baby Huey?
Sure,
was
who
the
could forget Baby
big
Huey?
dumb duck.
Right. Yeah.
And the
Fat shaming as you are right now.
and
You know
the
that.
fox.
And duck shaming, but
I'm duck shaming. The fox would always, hey pal, what do you say we go do this? And it'd be some treacherous thing that would just kill. Okay, so Baby Huey's going along. Oh, I like you, Mr. Fox, and he's trying to get him killed, and he's just imagining him roasting and just licking his chops, and finally he does something so outrageous, so crazy, that Baby Huey gets this moment where he turns around and he goes, "Hey, wait a minute. You're the fox, and you're trying to kill me." And then he just goes crazy and crams him in a cannon and shoots him off into outer space. We are about to hit our Baby Huey moment.
I think we're peeling off Baby Hueys one day at a time.
One
right?
day at a time.
What we need is like a mass Baby Huey moment, where
That's right.
everyone opens their eyes. A poll I saw now shows that the respect trust in the media among Americans is at all-time low, 26%, the lowest in the Western world, right?
Yeah, I saw that, but I didn't believe it.
You didn't believe it could be as high as 26%?
No, I just didn't believe it because it was in the media.
Yeah, exactly.
That's BS.
Well, one thing that is opening eyes very slowly and very apropos to our subject today is the 4-part report in the Columbia Journalism Review done by Jeff Girth. I don't know if you had a chance to look through that.
I haven't read it yet.
It's 20,000 words. It takes hours to read. I read it because it's part of what I do for research, but it's stunning. Not that there's anything that we didn't suspect. I mean, we've seen the sausage all along, but we're not allowed in the sausage factory. Jeff Girth, who's spent 3 decades at the New York Times, Pulitzer Prize winner, gets in the factory. He knows the factory. So when he writes about what he sees and knows and hears, he has people talking to him that would never talk to me. I've written about 15 books as an investigative reporter, but I can't get phone calls answered, right?
Yeah, you wrote the wrong book.
Yeah, right, exactly. But if you're an inside guy and they trust you, they'll talk to you. That said, even he was dismayed by how many people refused to talk to him, likely because he told them up front that what he was doing was an analysis of the media reporting in the years of the Trump era, space 2016 and 2023. And the report is devastating. I mean, it's remarkable how all the things we suspected.
Well, that we actually saw evidence
Right,
of.
right.
And then there was no action.
Yeah.
I can't read that kind of thing because it just pisses me off too much.
Well,
because I went through that whole drama of going, why hasn't anybody looked at the prima facie evidence here that this person has done this and all these experts were there and witnesses and they say that. And I mean, I was talking to Larry Sinclair the other day. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
No, well, you and I know who Larry Sinclair is,
We
right?
knew before the election who he
Sure
was.
did. I mean, we knew anyone who wanted to know could know, and many people in the media did know because in the lead up to the 2008 election, months beforehand, Larry Sinclair, openly gay man, holds a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington. Now, that's a prestigious place. It costs a lot of money to rent a room there. So he's obviously serious in his intent. And he goes through and he documents.
And not a Republican or a right wing.
No, not at all. But he documented a tryst, if that's the right word, T-R-Y-S-T, that he had with then State Senator Barack Obama, I think in the late, probably 99 or so, at a Chicago hotel in which he alleged, Larry Sinclair alleged, that they had they shared cocaine and semen with each other, I guess is the nicest way to say that, and he documented, he named the driver, the place, the time, everything, right?
Mm-hmm. There were a couple incidents.
Yeah.
There was a
At least
package
2.
delivered to the next.
Right. There was the driver he identifies who brings him out
Yeah.
there, et cetera. And, of course, the media wanted absolutely nothing to do with it to the degree they noticed it all. I think of these people as like the firemen in the book Fahrenheit 451. Do you recall that book?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And this is set in sometime in the future, which is probably now about 3 years ago, but it's a Ray Bradbury novel circa 1953 or something. But the firemen in the world of Fahrenheit 451.
Which is the temperature that paper burns at.
Thank you. That's exactly right. And their job was to burn books, right? Controlled burns of books and reading material for fear that people would learn things that they weren't supposed to learn. So in addition to the level of the major media, let's say the Washington Post, New York Times, there's a sub-level operating largely out of Washington that I call the firemen. There are people like places like BuzzFeed and Vox and, Media Matters, and their job is to attack the source of the news. The major media will ignore Larry Sinclair. The firemen will come in and burn his information. They'll say, oh, Larry Sinclair, he's wanted for a felony or outstanding warrant in some place, right? In fact, they had him arrested. One of those firemen made sure that the authorities were there to have him arrested for an outstanding warrant in, I think, Delaware. No, maybe it was Colorado. I don't know. Delaware is redolent of too much Biden stuff, but that's how they operate.
And you remember there was a murder attached to that
There was,
story,
yes.
too.
Yeah.
That was the choir director, I think. Was
And at the
somehow-
United Church of Christ in Chicago, that is the Reverend Wright's church.
Right.
And I think his name was Donald Young.
That sounds right.
And his mother still thinks that he was murdered by people close to the, and the deepest rumors is there's a homosexual cabal operating in that church.
The Down Low Club.
Yeah, right. What do you call it? The Boys Club of Chicago, or whatever.
Down Low Club.
Down Low Club, yeah.
That's what they called it.
Well, Down Low is a generic term for.
But that's what they called it at that church.
Oh, okay. Oh, in the church, yeah, yeah. Well, Down Low, just for those who may not know what that phrase means, is sort of a generic term in black culture for that class of generally well-educated, married black men who have to who keep their homosexuality out of sight. Basically, it operates the way white professionals operated, say, 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago. You know, you have these places you go where everyone knows who you are, but that nothing, what happens there stays there. And Barack Obama was alleged to be a participant therein, so anyhow, but it's not news because I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. We don't want to hear that kind of news, so it's just the way they operate.
But there is that machine that does that, and then there's another element of those at that level of press. Somehow,
Yeah.
I don't really know how this sausage is made, but it is they accuse their opponents of doing what they're doing to create the maximum cover and chaos. It's like projection.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it goes on all the time.
Right.
So whenever there's this may leak out. There's some kind of a chance that let's get ahead of this and accuse them of it.
Right.
Then they sound like they're trying to prove a negative, and they sound like they're trapped into a phony. It makes them look like the person who's shucking and jiving.
Oh, exactly. In fact, I've had some experience because I've gotten to work with James O'Keefe of Project Veritas over the years, and what happens no matter what he puts out, right? It's discredited and debunked, deceptively edited.
I noticed he said in one of his recent marvelous deals that he did, he goes, "It's so weird that no matter what we do, every time they call the police on me."
Right. Yeah. Right. And you're referring specifically to the Pfizer bust, right?
Well, he did say it then, but he said it with every time he's done it.
Yeah, every time, right.
Yeah.
But sure enough, he's asking questions of this guy they caught on camera. This is before it goes they go public with
Kind of public, and then it went unpublic
right
after the fact.
Oh, sure. But what O'Keefe does, though, this is with Project Veritas, they and gays are a weak link in the secret-keeping business because gay men are relatively easy to approach, and apparently some of them like to talk. This is not the first time they've stung a gay man with Project Veritas. Before that, reporters were good because guys like to talk to them. But in this case, the guy was gay, obviously gay, admittedly gay.
It's a honey trap. It works either way.
Yeah, it works both ways, right? So before Project Veritas releases their undercover videos of him giving away all the secrets of Pfizer, they show him what he says. They give him an opportunity to comment.
Right.
So this hasn't gone public yet. And what happened in this case, the Pfizer guy just throws a hissy fit, right? That was just crazy. He ends up like grabbing the iPad or whatever, throwing it on the ground, stomping on it, and then calling the police to come arrest James O'Keefe just for asking him questions, right?
And not letting anybody out of the restaurant, and then flagging down a car that isn't even O'Keefe's
Yeah,
outside
right,
in the
right.
traffic.
And now, and to our point, last I looked, 25 million people had seen this video, thanks to Twitter, by the way, thanks to Elon Musk. And yet, not a word of it
Yeah.
had bled into the major media.
It just wasn't worth reporting.
Nah.
It just didn't have any element of news quality.
Right.
There was nothing. I mean, okay, there's been some allegation that this Pfizer product has been somewhat dangerous and maybe hurt a couple of people.
And there may be
couple
this
million
kind of, what they call it, forced evolution or something of various
Yeah.
mutants. But nah, we don't care about that. Just so a couple million people have died of this disease that was created in a lab that we don't want to talk about, don't want to know about that
I
one.
don't know about that.
And so it becomes almost comic how often this is done and to what effect. The effect is that their side remains remarkably ignorant. So talking about the Jeff Gerth piece on the Russia collusion in the Columbia Journalism Review, I went online to see what the Twitter response was immediately afterwards. I read it. And like I say, it takes a couple hours to read. It's 20,000 words long. I read the whole thing because I've, reportorial interest in it.
Is that thing you sent me?
Yes.
I'm glad I gave up after page 2.
It would have pissed you off.
How many pages was it?
A lot. 20,000 words is probably 60 pages of a
I
book.
couldn't plow through 2 pages of that, but
Yeah.
go ahead.
But it was critical. And so all the responses, and they get into this lemming-like train of thought. I mean, so someone says something on Twitter, like makes a comment. Oh, we're supposed to believe Jeff Gerth, the guy who reported on Whitewater, right? And I'm thinking, what was wrong with his reporting on Whitewater? I didn't know there was a problem with his reporting. Other than that, he reported it. He's with the New York Times. He's not supposed to report on Bill Clinton. And then all the other Twitter references. Oh, is that Whitewater, Jeff Gerth? I mean, half these people didn't even know what Whitewater was. They were just saying these things. And that's the lower level. You get the major media. These are the sausage makers up here. Then you get the firemen down here. And down here you get the lemmings. Just echoes, just saying what they're supposed to say and saying it with such conviction. And throwing in F-bombs, too, just to make it sound somehow more dramatic and worth talking about.
Well, it's quite a wall. It's quite a wall of propaganda.
Yeah. And the story that's gotten my interest, I'm not sure I know why, except that it's so tangible and real and so ignored and is so pivotal to everything else that happens. And that is the murder of Seth Rich. Now, people talk about the murder of Vince Foster, but we don't know that he was murdered. I personally think he was, but I don't know that he was. But I know that Seth Rich was murdered. He's a 27-year-old DNC data analyst. This is a July evening in 2016. Lots going on this month. He goes to a bar in, do you know Washington, D.C. very well?
No.
But it's in a nice part of Washington, D.C. And then he walks home. And it takes like 2 hours. I don't know, there's not a lot of clarity on what was going on during that walk. It's only a 20-minute walk, half-hour walk to his house. And it's a nice part of town. And then about 3:30 a.m., we know that he's murdered. He's beaten up and shot twice in the back. And what makes one suspicious about it, this could happen in Washington, I suppose, but typically people who murder other people at 3 a.m. in a nice part of Washington on the street take the wallet, take the watch, take the jewelry, take the cell phone. The thieves took none of that. Now, this was covered at the time the way they would cover any murder of a white person in a nice part of Washington, which was the Deep Six said back on page B38 or something, And especially so because a couple of weeks later, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks is being interviewed on a Dutch TV station. And he says, just out of nowhere, he's being interviewed about his sources and the leaks they run and risks they run. And he says to the Dutch TV guy, he says, our sources run risk. He goes, look at what happened in Washington, D.C. to that young man who was just murdered on the streets of Washington, D.C. And the Dutch TV guy is in major media mold. He's in this mold. That was a robbery. He knows enough to say that, right? This isn't Holland. This is a story that was like deep sixth in America, and he knows enough to say, oh, that was a robbery. And then Assange says, no, there's no indication of that at all, right?
Right.
And then immediately change the subject. And then he goes, so you're trying to say he was one of your sources? And Assange saying, I'm not going to say that. I protect my sources. I don't name sources. But then Assange does put up a $20,000 reward for the murder of Seth Rich. Now, you'd think that at that point, given what's going on in the interim, WikiLeaks has released all these Hillary Clinton DNC emails, very embarrassing for Hillary. There are more to come. And this guy's a data analyst and a Bernie guy, right? And what the emails indicated was that Bernie Sanders was getting screwed by the Hillary Clinton campaign, right? Mm-hmm. And as a result, they made such an impression just right before the convention, big embarrassment. The DNC had to fire its head, which was Debbie Wasserman Schultz. You could probably do a good imitation of her if you've wanted to, but
I met her accidentally.
She always struck me as like what Shirley Temple would have looked like at 60 had Shirley Temple tried to maintain that look for the 50 years after it was useful,
Well, let me tell you, it ain't good, but go ahead.
And you met her?
I did.
And what was the occasion?
Man, I was down in Florida, and I was having a business lunch with a friend of mine and a lawyer who was kind of a questionable character.
You wouldn't know any of those, would you?
And we were in some restaurant I'd never been in. It was a nice place. And he goes, and he sees somebody he knows, and he gets up and he goes, let me introduce you to Loy. And I get up and I turn around and I shake hands, and it's Debbie.
And
I was like, nice to meet you.
And what was she like? Did she take an interest in you?
Oh, yeah.
How could she not have? You being the
Got some texts right here.
master of charm that you are.
Yeah, man.
Well, anyhow, she loses her job because it's so embarrassing.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
And they put in charge now Donna Brazile, right?
Yep.
Donna Brazil's an old D.C. hand, and she would soon lose her job for feeding debate questions to Hillary Clinton during one of the Trump debates. But when she was working for ABC, right, or CNN.
Yeah, but we can't report on that.
No, I don't want to hear that.
Can you imagine in a real world where NBC and ABC wouldn't jump on that?
Yeah.
And just land with all four and go.
Honestly.
And just tear them up for that?
Yeah. And if they were real reporters doing real
Yeah.
journalism, yeah. How could they not? I mean, that's like, I'm saying, if you're in Washington, D.C., and there's a real murder that you cannot deny took place. Donna Brazile, by the way, gets a job as the head of the DNC.
And she said, I don't want to get the same treatment he got.
But she, in fact, when she writes her book the next year called Hacks, of all things, she dedicates it to Seth Rich, right? And she speculates that he was either in the wrong part of town or he got murdered by the Russians. This is the head of the DNC. And the major media, I don't want to hear. How did she say that? Why did she say that? Doesn't she know she's supposed to be on the same page we are?
She actually made an allusion to that case.
Yeah.
Where she indirectly blamed the DNC.
Yeah.
Because she said, I wouldn't do something because I wouldn't want to get the same treatment he got.
Right.
Well, that meant she was alluding to the fact that it was a hit.
Right. Now some new information's come out, which the major media has no interest in. But I follow pretty closely. So just in the way of continuing that thread, is that it just came out. This lawyer in Texas named Ty Clevenger has been, through a proxy client, has been FOIA-ing the FBI for years, Freedom of Information Act, and just bugging them to the point where finally he got them to admit, because they were being forced by a judge, that the laptop of Seth Rich had been in the possession of CrowdStrike for all of these years. Now we're getting a little into the weeds here, so stop me if I'm confusing you. In April of 2016, the DNC hired CrowdStrike, which is a private cybersecurity firm, Democrat-friendly, headed by a guy from Ukraine or Russia, to investigate the exfiltration of information from its computers. They knew someone had gotten in there. They didn't know how. Even CrowdStrike doesn't know how, and they admit as much. But in the process of which, they took control of Seth Rich's laptop, right? So this took 7 years to surface. Now, what they did not do, what the DNC did not do, is to tell the FBI, right? Mm-hmm. They did not report the fact that their material had been purloined to the FBI. They handled it privately. They handled it through their law firm, Perkins Coie, which is the same law firm, by the way, that gave us the Steele dossier, and the same law firm that just happened to find Barack Obama's birth certificate in 2011.
Yep.
This is the way this world turns.
The one that was created in InDesign, Photoshop.
I am totally convinced that that's true. But dare we say that? We would be banned from all networks, certainly. You know, I mean, the prescriptions on things you cannot say that will end you in the tank are amazing. So now we know that the FBI never even took formal possession of the laptop. It was always in possession of CrowdStrike. They saw the information, but they did get a hold of his personal laptop, his work laptop, personal laptop. So they've had this information for 7 years and suppressed it and made believe they had no interest in the Seth Rich case because it's a local murder. Who cares, right? Now, you know, governments do bad things. We expect them to. But you're a journalist in Washington, D.C. You see all this going on. And Assange would get even more specific later and say that, yes, that Russian, the DNC servers were never hacked. That information came out to us on a thumb drive from sources within the DNC.
That's right. They could tell by how quickly it was downloaded.
Right. And you're in Washington, and you're a journalist, and you've seen all the president's men 12 times, right? And you sit on your butt and you don't do anything except attack people who dare to ask questions about why this murder, literal murder, took place. And you take the Metropolitan D.C.'s word for it that it was a botched robbery, right?
Well, every one of these cases, I made some notes. I'm gonna read. I got a little kind of an all-star list
lineup
of ways that the media has jumped the shark.
Yeah.
To the point where it's getting us close to the Baby Huey moment because the stuff is so crazy. And every one of these things that I'm going to mention it, and then I want to get your reaction to it.
Okay, right.
But I think that you and I, because we go to other sources like deep dive interviews and things like that,
sure, and
read alternative sites, we're aware of each one of these things, fully fleshed out, knew all about it before it A, appeared in the mass media, or B, was acknowledged by any official in any capacity.
Right.
So, and in the meantime, a major election may have taken place that would have been impacted. It doesn't matter. Okay? Just a little list of things that are just so off the crazy train tracks that you can't believe the media buried them. You know, we started with Larry Sinclair, but at the same time we had, at that same period, now pre-election, there were things about Frank Marshall Davis that were never mentioned.
Oh, gosh. I'll give you an example of that. David Marinas, Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post reporter, does a 100,000-word article in 2008, August 2008, on Obama's Hawaii years, and doesn't so much as mention the man who, in Dreams from My Father, is mentioned more than anyone but a family member, and that's Frank Marshall Davis. Doesn't even mention him, right? The mentor to Barack Obama, the black mentor who indoctrinated him in communist ways and also in ways of likely pedophilia, but that's a little more speculative, because Davis was a pornographer as well as a card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. Doesn't mention
As
him.
were his grandparents, Obama's grandparents.
Yeah.
They were card-carrying members. And I think one of his photo subjects was that gal from Kansas.
Well, that is
related.
Yeah, that's debatable as to whether among his photo souvenirs was Ann Dunham, the mom, allegedly always presented as from Kansas, but she spent their formative years in Seattle, which they don't even know that. I mean, you walk into a major newsroom today, and they do not know. If you ask them, where did Barack Obama spend the first year of his life?
Yeah, they don't know, and they don't know where. And they'll say that he went to these certain colleges,
Right? And they'll say,
but there are no records.
no, right? I mean, he spent
people like Wayne Allen Root, who went to Columbia at the same time, taking the same courses, political science,
Right.
at Columbia, where BHO allegedly was.
Yeah.
He says, I never saw the guy. He couldn't have been there. We would have had all the same classes, the same instructors. I never saw him.
Well, here's one thing. There are certain things that are speculated, including I will say on the card-carrying member status of Obama's grandparents. I know the grandfather had an FBI file. I don't know if he was a card-carrying member. Frank Marshall Davis had a 600-page FBI file. He was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA, and he was Obama's mentor and likely his the indoctrinator into the ways of homosexuality.
Not a lot of people think he was his father.
Some people do, yeah. But we do know for a fact that the parents never spent the night together under the same roof, the alleged parents, Barack Sr. and Ann Dunham, and that she took the baby to Seattle soon after his birth, and he spent the first year of his life with his mother in Seattle, Washington. The people in Seattle, Washington don't know that. I mean, we don't want to know. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I mean, it's amazing. You can keep going.
Okay, we talked about the laptop. I wrote that down. Now, this is where I think the military-industrial complex and the media have jumped the shark together.
Right.
Where they've blown that cover, okay?
Let me just stop you here. Do you know where the phrase "jump the shark" comes from?
Yes.
Okay.
It comes from a Happy Days episode.
Right, exactly.
Where they got just so hard up for show. I mean, they'd done everything you could possibly do with the situation.
Right.
And then Fonzie is skiing.
Water skiing. Right?
Water skiing. Anyway.
And he has to literally jump sharks. By the way, it reminds me that Cindy Williams just passed, who was Ron Howard's co-star in American Graffiti. Mm-hmm. But she's like 8 years older than he is. And they were like a couple in American Graffiti.
Is that right?
Yeah, I want my money back. It was like pedophilia on parade there. He was like 12 and she's 20. No, he's probably 18.
She was
26.
with OP. Okay, so military and the media. I got three different stories that I think were so obviously baffled.
Yeah.
General Milley.
Thoroughly modern Milley.
Going to Red China to tell him to kind of, hey, take what this president guy says with a grain of salt.
Right.
I got you covered.
We'll have more flexibility when our guy's elected.
Okay, that's a big, big crime.
Right.
Capital T on that crime.
Right.
That's like a crime.
Oh, John Kerry went to Iran and said pretty much the same thing,
It wasn't. It was dropped.
Yeah,
I
sure.
mean, it wasn't even a story. The Ukraine money. When we had the gentleman who was the former vice president, who's now occupying the White House.
Is a gentleman in the White House? Oh, okay.
He announced, he bragged and you've seen the clip, and I've seen the clip, and we've seen it a million times, but you'll never see it on any kind of mass media, where he bragged about essentially overthrowing the Ukraine government and holding out $2 billion
Right.
that he controlled.
Right.
And
And
said,
son of a bitch.
he got fired. Okay, now that's a huge story, but that
and it's so undeniable, so palpable, and so visual.
and there he is bragging about he's spiking the ball on
Right.
this one.
Right.
Okay, does anybody think it's weird that we're now like piping tens of billions of dollars to a country that just a few years ago he was bragging that they overthrew, that happens to be right next to one of these big
It's a small
nuclear
country
It's a
next
small-
to a big country.
Yeah. Okay, now that one, and that just shows you when they don't expose these things, how out of control things can get.
Right.
I mean, now we're on the precipice
Yeah.
of the big boom
Yeah.
because of all this. It's never been mentioned yet. People are going to go, wow, why would Putin feel threatened by Ukraine? I mean, just because we swore through NATO that we would never encroach, and aren't we sending a whole bunch of missiles and tanks and cannons and everything over there?
And you know what's worse, and which ties back to the whole story of Russia collusion, is that we made Russia evil so we could better frame Donald Trump's relationship with Russia.
That's right. So that's the media not only baffling and not reporting,
Yeah.
but taking whole cloth fabrications and just blanketing the media with it for years and years.
Right.
That and here's Putin. If you've read any of his recent speeches in the last several years, sounding like Mother Teresa on there, going, "We got to get back to Christianity.
Right.
We've got to get our culture back on track. We've got to be, we've got to live up to a higher moral standard." And
Right.
I mean, things that, I'm sorry, but dictators who are trying to stir up the people and gaslight everybody so they'll fall in line and do crazy stuff like dictators do, they don't talk like that because there's no payoff for them
Sure. Right.
to go, hey, God.
Right. I mean, that can happen in Islamic countries where, you get people riled, but not in Christian countries. It doesn't happen.
So Afghanistan exit.
Yeah.
What a monumental story.
Right.
And that thing disappeared in a couple of days. I think that was one of the biggest. If you talk to any military guy, they'll say that was the biggest tragedy we've had in the last 100 years.
Well, certainly since the last days in Saigon, which we were never allowed to forget. And we were
That's
never
right.
allowed to forget him because there's a Republican in the White House.
That's right.
Despite the fact that the Saigon fell the way it did because the Democrats thoroughly pulled the rug out from underneath the South Vietnamese government. But that's another long story.
So we
I wanna
left
get
all
into.
these people twisting in the wind
Yeah.
back there in
Yeah.
Afghanistan.
Right.
And here's all these billions of dollars. And by the way, it's all going back to Russia now.
Right.
I mean,
Brittany Griner got more news coverage than the hundreds left behind in Afghanistan. That was the 6'8" junkie basketball anti-American woman who got busted at the Moscow airport with hashish.
well, and so that's the military and the media.
Yeah.
They've overplayed their hand. I mean, to anybody who's paying any attention, these three strikes here, you cannot have any confidence in them. Now, with the Department of Justice and the media, Ray Epps is a big story.
Right.
Nobody's heard of Ray Epps, except for everybody who's been paying attention.
Right. Which is about 20% of the population.
I mean, the whole charade of putting on a big investigation when there's a guy standing there in the camera going, "Hey, let's go! Come on, all you people, let's get in that White House."
Right.
And everybody's going, "Well, what about this guy?"
Yeah. Well, and this is the problem you have. We may have spoken about this somewhat before, but of engaging in a conversation with people who are not politically attuned the way you are. So how do I talk about Seth Rich when they don't even know who Seth Rich is? How do you talk about Ray Epps when they don't know who Ray Epps is? And so when I do something like this, Ukraine is a small country next to a big country. They have no idea what I'm talking. They think I'm crazy.
Right.
Or when I talk about the big guy, they don't know who I'm talking about. So it makes communication difficult because you got to overcome the hurdles because of the gaps that are left in the people's knowledge base, So if you and I were to talk about the guy at Pfizer, right, to at least 50% of the American people, they would have no idea who we were talking about.
And I usually just ask them when people are spouting the latest headlines and talking about, these idiots that went down there and took over the White House and they serves them right. And I say, but what did they say about Ray Epps?
Yeah.
And they go, huh?
Yeah.
And I go,
That's right. Yeah. So,
and read up on it and we'll talk about
right,
this
exactly.
later.
There's no place better to start. Hey, by the way, we are, doing our podcast here at Real Media Studios in Overland Park, Kansas, full service.
Yeah, great studio.
Great people, great place. I would recommend it. Any special people have asked me, how did you get to a podcast? Well, I would say call Real Media, and they can set you up just like they do us. Of course, they won't, future other podcasters won't be as amusing or as knowledgeable as we are.
No.
But
They're giving us their best.
They could try, and it's very reasonable rates and a great.
That's a great studio.
A great producer whose name I won't mention because it might be tainted by association with us, Carly. But the
I got the big one.
Give me the big one. Well, let's end with the big one.
This is the big one. Now, this one was so ridiculous that everybody called it in advance.
Uh-huh.
And I mean people who were not enlightened.
Right.
I mean media non-savvy people.
Right.
Everybody called this one in advance. This was so obvious that this crime was going to occur, and then it occurred, and then everybody said, wow, saw that coming, and joked about it, and the media was mum and remains mum, and the story is not solved. And it just got glossed over, and the door got shut on it, and it's obvious as to why this happened. And that's Epstein. Killing himself.
Honestly.
Everybody said,
right.
Oh, he's going to kill himself. He's going to kill himself. You know, it was the big air quotes.
Right.
With the smirk.
Right.
Oh, man. Because, of course, everybody, for years, in my case, and I'm sure in yours, had been exposed to all this information that this guy was up to really gnarly stuff that involved pedophilia.
With some prominent
and
people.
Prostitutes, but a lot of underage women with many, many prominent people. And everybody said, wow. And then, of course, he somehow hangs himself with wounds that the expert physician who came in and examined him said, I've examined 500 suicides by hanging.
Yeah.
And I've never seen one with this pattern of injury. This guy was strangled. Okay, but none of that made any kind of news. And Bill Barr, or who is it, Barr?
Yeah.
He looked at.
You confuse him with Bill Burr sometimes. But.
I do, the comedian. Yeah, but he just said, it looks like there's nothing here. And what have you heard about that lately?
Well, here's what we have. For this to have happened, the guards had to be asleep, which they said they were. The video recorders had to be defective, which they were. Right.
What was that happened just on like a previous one too?
Yeah,
when all the cameras were out.
No, yeah, it's like it happened with TWA Flight 800, where all the satellites were out that night, and of course there were no photographs of the alleged hanging. All of a sudden, there's no even photographs of him lying on the floor. He just whisked off to some hospital somewhere, like Osama bin Laden. Here's another one. You want to get into that?
And the Supreme Court justice.
Yeah. Scalia.
Scalia.
I think Scalia died literally.
Yeah, but
legitimately.
But there was still, it's like, well, no way, no
yeah.
ambulances.
No, we don't want to know. Who cares? I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. But if you're listening to Upstream with Cashill and Edge, you do get to hear it, and just think how much wiser everyone will be upon hearing this show, Lloyd.
That's right.
I envy them the knowledge they'll have gained during
Me
this
too.
period.
It's even deeper than envy.
Hey, we'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Thanks.
For joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.